Jerry Johnson had just lost everything he spent 15 years building, and he was walking home alone with a cardboard box under his arm when the sky sent two black helicopters down to change his life forever. Before we continue, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Seeing how far our stories travel reminds us that meaningful storytelling knows no borders. Jerry Johnson had worked at Crestwood Medical Center for 15 years. 15 years of 12-hour shifts, of skipping holidays, of missing his daughter Maya's school plays and birthday dinners, and the small ordinary moments that parents were supposed to be present for. He had saved over 3,000 lives in that hospital. He had performed surgeries that other doctors said were impossible, had stayed late when everyone else went home, had come in early when no one asked him to, had answered his phone at 2 in the morning, and 3 in the morning, and 4 in the morning, because someone was always dying somewhere, and Jerry Johnson was always the person they called. He gave that hospital everything he had, and on a Tuesday morning in October, the hospital gave him a cardboard box and told him to put his things in it. It started at 8 in the morning, when director Harold Vane called Jerry into his office. Vane was a tall, thin man who wore expensive suits and had never performed a surgery in his life. He had come to Crestwood 2 years earlier from a corporate consulting firm that specialized in healthcare optimization, which was a phrase that meant finding ways to spend less money on sick people while keeping the appearance of a functioning hospital. From the day Vane arrived, he had made it clear that his job was not to save lives. His job was to save money. He had introduced new protocols, new transfer policies, new budget restrictions. He had replaced experienced nurses with cheaper contract staff. He had cut the rehabilitation program. He had renegotiated supply contracts in ways that reduced quality. He had done all of this carefully and with enough paperwork to make it look reasonable, and he had received a performance bonus for it at the end of his first year. Jerry sat down across from Vane's wide oak desk and noticed immediately that Vane did not offer him coffee. That was the first sign. Vane always offered coffee when he wanted something from you. When he did not offer coffee, it meant the conversation was already over before it started. Jerry, Vane said, folded his hands on the desk. I want to talk to you about the Patterson case. Jerry knew the Patterson case. Every doctor in the hospital knew the Patterson case because Jerry had not exactly been quiet about it. Robert Patterson was a 62-year-old man who had come into the emergency room 3 weeks earlier with a brain bleed. He was a retired bus driver. He had no insurance, no savings, and no family who could pay his bills. Standard hospital policy, according to the new guidelines that Vane had introduced the previous year, was to stabilize such patients and transfer them to county facilities within 24 hours. County facilities were understaffed, underfunded, and operating at capacity. Jerry knew from experience that transferring Patterson there in his condition was not a medical transfer. It was a slow execution with extra paperwork. So Jerry had not transferred him. Jerry had performed a 7-hour surgery on Robert Patterson, used $60,000 worth of hospital resources, kept him in intensive care for 2 weeks, and saved his life completely. Patterson had walked out of the hospital 10 days ago with his brain working perfectly and tears running down his face, shaking Jerry's hand with both of his, and Jerry had felt in that moment that the whole 15 years had been worth it. Every missed birthday dinner, every holiday shift, every 2 in the morning phone call, all of it had been leading to that moment, that handshake, that man walking out the door on his own legs. Vane did not see it that way. You went significantly over budget on an uninsured patient. Vane said, you ignored the transfer protocol. You used resources allocated for paying patients. You tied up an ICU bed for 14 days on a charity case. Do you understand the financial exposure you created for this institution? I understand that the man would have died, Jerry said. That is not your decision to make. Vane said, your decision is to follow policy. My policy, the board's policy, the policy that exists for good financial reasons that you've been explained multiple times. The board's policy is to let poor people die, so the quarterly numbers look better. Jerry said. Vane straightened his tie with 2 fingers. The board's policy is fiscal responsibility. This hospital is a business, Jerry, not a charity. You have been reminded of this on multiple occasions. Last year with the Diaz family. The year before that with the Okonkwo twins. The year before that with the elderly woman whose name I cannot recall, but whose bill was $90,000 and whose family paid zero of it. Every time I audit your department, every time I look at your expense reports, I see a doctor who has decided that the rules simply do not apply to him. Jerry wanted to say many things. He wanted to point out that the Diaz children were alive and healthy because of him. He wanted to say that the Okonkwo twins had gone on to become kids who had never spent another night in a hospital. He wanted to say that the elderly woman Vane could not bother to remember had a name, which was Margaretchen, and that she had gone home to her grandchildren after a surgery that Jerry had performed for free. He wanted to say that you did not measure medicine in dollars, that the moment you started measuring medicine in dollars was the moment you stopped practicing medicine at all. But it said all those things before, in the same office, across the same oak desk, to the same man. He had said them calmly, and then less calmly. He had filed formal objections to the transfer protocol through 3 different internal channels. He had requested a meeting with the board and been told the board did not hold meetings with individual physicians about policy matters. He had done everything except stop being who he was. And he was not going to do that. "I'm terminating your employment," Vane said. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. You will receive a standard severance package per your contract. Your medical license will not be affected, as this is a performance and compliance matter, not a licensure one. But you are no longer welcome at this institution." Jerry sat in that chair for a long moment. He did not speak. He thought about 15 years. He thought about Maya, who was 9 years old, and who needed him to keep paying the mortgage on the small house they shared 2 miles from the hospital. He thought about his ex-wife Linda, who had left him 4 years ago because the hospital always came first, and she had eventually gotten tired of being second, and who would not help with the mortgage even if he called her and asked nicely. He thought about the 3 better-paying jobs at private hospitals he had turned down in the last decade because he believed that Crestwood served people who needed a good hospital, and he was one of the reasons it was still a good hospital. He had been wrong about that last part. Or maybe he had been right about it once, and the thing he believed in had changed without him noticing fast enough. Then he stood up, thanked Vane for nothing, and walked his office to fill a cardboard box. The box was not very full when he was done. He had never been the kind of doctor who decorated his office heavily or accumulated personal objects in his workspace. There was a photo of Maya from last summer, taken at the beach, where she was laughing at something off camera, and the light was catching her hair exactly right. There were 3 medical textbooks that were technically his personal property and not the hospital's. There was a coffee mug with a chip in the handle that he had owned since his residency and had never replaced because it held exactly the right amount of coffee. That was all. 15 years, and he could carry the whole thing in one arm. The security guard who escorted him out was a young man named Tony who had worked the front desk for 3 years and who had called Jerry twice in the middle of his own shifts because his mother was having health problems and he trusted Jerry's advice. Tony did not say anything during the walk to the exit. He looked embarrassed. Jerry told him it was all right and meant it, because it was not Tony's fault, and Jerry did not waste energy being angry at people who did not deserve it. An hour after the conversation in Vane's office, Jerry Johnson was walking down Route 9, in his street clothes, carrying that cardboard box, with the October sun already hot on his neck, and no plan in his head beyond getting home and figuring out what came next. He was angry, not the loud, shaking kind of angry, but the quiet, settled kind that sits in a man's chest like a stone and does not move. He had been wronged. He knew it, and Vane knew it, and the security guard knew it, and probably the board knew it somewhere underneath all their financial projections. Being right about it did not help him with the mortgage. He had walked about half a mile when he heard the helicopters. He did not pay attention at first. Helicopters were not unusual near a hospital, but these were getting louder, and they were getting louder from a direction that did not make sense, because a hospital was behind him, not ahead. He looked up and saw 2 black helicopters coming from the north, flying low and fast, their noses tilted forward in the way that aircraft flew when they were in a real hurry. They were heading directly toward the stretch of road where he was walking. Jerry stepped to the side of the road. The helicopters did not pass over him. They came down. Both of them landed in the wide empty field beside Route 9, with a noise like the sky cracking open, and the downwash from the blades flattened the tall grass in every direction and nearly took the cardboard box out of Jerry's hands. He turned his face away and shielded his eyes and watched as the side door of the first helicopter slid open before the blades had even finished slowing down. A woman jumped out. She was in her mid-30s, wearing a white blazer over a red blouse, and she was moving toward him with a kind of urgency that told him immediately that someone was dying. People moved differently when someone was dying. Jerry had been reading that movement his whole career. "Dr. Johnson!" she shouted over the roar of the rotors. "We need the doctor." Jerry looked behind him, then back at her. "How do you know my name?" "There is no time," she said, and she was already close enough that he could see her face clearly. She was not panicking. She was past panic, in the place beyond it where a person goes when they have accepted that things are as bad as they can get, and the only thing left to do is find someone who can fix them. "Please come with me. Someone is dying, and you are the only one who can help him." Jerry looked at the helicopter. He looked at the woman. He looked at the cardboard box in his hands. Then he looked at the photo of Maya in the box, smiling at something he would never know about, light in her hair. He set the box down on the side of the road. "Tell me what happened," he said, and he followed her toward the helicopter. The woman's name was Adeline Thorne, and in the 3 minutes it took the helicopter to climb and turn north, she told Jerry everything he needed to know and some things he was not yet sure what to do with. Her employer was Silas Thorne. Jerry had heard the name. Everyone in the country had heard the name. Silas Thorne was 67 years old and worth somewhere around $40 billion, depending on which financial publication you read and on which day. He had built his fortune through a network of healthcare companies, real estate holdings, and technology investments that crossed 12 countries and employed approximately 90,000 people. He was private almost to the point of being invisible. He had not appeared in public in over 2 years. He gave no interviews, attended no charity galas, and refused every invitation to appear before congressional committees that summoned him. His personal staff signed non-disclosure agreements that were 12 pages long and written by lawyers who clearly enjoyed their work. "He collapsed this morning," Adeline said, sitting across from Jerry in the helicopter cabin, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The helicopter was moving fast, and the noise was significant, but the cabin was well insulated, and she spoke in a clear, controlled voice that Jerry respected immediately. She was a woman who had trained herself to function under pressure, and it showed. He was at his estate. His personal physician identified it immediately as a hemorrhagic stroke, but the clinical presentation was unusual. The bleed is in a location the physician said he had never encountered in his 30-year career. "We transported him to St. Agatha's first because it is the closest major hospital with a neurosurgery department. They reviewed the imaging and declined to operate. They said the location of the bleed makes surgery essentially impossible without a near certain risk of catastrophic damage to surrounding structures." "And you went to a second hospital," Jerry said. "University Hospital." Their chief of neurosurgery looked at the scans for 20 minutes and said the same thing. He said any surgeon who attempted to operate in that location should lose their license. "How long ago did he collapse?" Jerry asked. 4 hours and 22 minutes, Adeline said. Jerry did the calculation. Time was everything with a brain bleed. Every minute that blood continued to accumulate inside the skull built pressure against brain tissue. Every minute of pressure was minutes of potential damage to cognitive function, motor control, speech, memory. For hours was already a long time. 2 major hospitals with experienced neurosurgeons had looked at the scans and refused to go in. That meant the imaging showed something genuinely dangerous, not just technically difficult. It meant the consensus was that the patient was probably going to die. "Why me?" Jerry said, "I am a trauma surgeon. I am not a neurosurgeon. The people who looked at those scans and said no are more specifically trained for this than I am." "We know what you are," Adeline said. 3 years ago, you performed a surgery at Crestwood on a patient named Victor Osei. He presented with a basilar artery aneurysm in a location that your own hospital's neurosurgery department classified as inoperable. You performed the procedure alone at 2 a.m. with a scrub nurse and a resident, and the patient is alive and working full-time today. We know about the Reyes case from 18 months ago. We know about the procedure on the Tanaka woman last spring that the surgical team initially refused to attempt. Dr. Johnson, we have been following your work for some time. Jerry was quiet for a moment. He watched the landscape moving below them. Following my work for what purpose? Adeline looked out the window. That is a conversation that should happen after you save his life. The helicopter landed in a cleared area on the grounds of Thorne's estate, which was large enough that Jerry could not see its boundaries from the air. The main building was stone construction, old and enormous, maintained to a standard that suggested significant ongoing investment. There were 8 people waiting on the landing pad, all of them moving with coordinated efficiency. They brought Jerry inside immediately, down a corridor and then down 2 flights of stairs to a level he had not expected. It was a medical facility, a complete one. 2 fully equipped operating rooms, a diagnostic imaging suite that had equipment Jerry recognized as among the most advanced currently available commercially, a pharmacy, a recovery area with 6 beds, and monitoring systems that were current with the best hospital technology. This was not a first aid station or a basic medical room. This was a private hospital built underneath a private home, fully staffed and operational. He has his own medical facility, Jerry said. He has 3, Adeline said. This is the nearest to where he collapsed. Silas Thorne was in the first operating room, sedated and intubated, with 2 4 lines running and a monitoring system tracking everything. Jerry looked at him through the observation window first. Thorne was a physically large man, still broad-shouldered at 67, with white hair and a face that Jerry half recognized from old photographs. The face was gray now and still. His personal physician, a careful man named Dr. Patel, who had been with Thorne for 12 years, met Jerry at the door and handed him a tablet with the complete imaging set. Jerry looked at the scans for 4.5 minutes without speaking. He did not look at them casually. He studied them the way he studied everything that mattered from the beginning, in order, comparing the early images to the more recent ones to track the progression. Patel and Adeline stood behind him and said nothing, because both of them were smart enough to understand that he needed silence to think properly. The bleed was real and it was serious. It was located at the posterior junction between the thalamus and the posterior cerebral artery territory, in a region surrounded on 3 sides by critical neural structures. The physical access to that location was extremely restricted. Any surgical instrument moving toward the bleed had to pass through a narrow channel with almost no margin for error, and on the other side of that channel were structures that, if damaged, would leave Thorne alive but with no meaningful quality of life. St. Agatha's had been right. University Hospital had been right. Most surgeons should not attempt this. But Jerry had seen something similar once before. Not identical, but close enough that the pattern was familiar to him. The approach that had worked in the similar case needed significant adjustment for the specific anatomy, and the margin for error was very small. But it existed. There was a way through. A very narrow way, but a real one. What anesthesia has he received? Jerry asked. Patel told him, with dosages and timing. Jerry asked 4 more questions about Thorne's blood pressure history over the past 6 months, his current coagulation panel, any prior neurological events, and whether he had received any anticoagulant medications in the past 72 hours. Patel answered all 4 clearly and quickly. Jerry handed the tablet back, walked into the operating room, and went to the sink to scrub his hands. You are going to attempt it? Adeline said from the doorway, and her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that was not quite controlled. Yes, Jerry said. Get me your best scrub nurse and whoever handles anesthesia in this facility. Keep Dr. Patel in the room for monitoring. Everyone else stays out. What are the odds? Adeline said. Jerry thought about honest answers versus useful answers. Better than they were 2 hours ago, he said. That is the best I can give you right now. The surgery took 6 hours and 50 minutes. Jerry did not think about the helicopter ride during those hours. He did not think about Adeline or Route 9, or the cardboard box, or Director Vane, or what came next for him professionally or financially. He thought about nothing except the work in front of his hands, because that was the only way to do this kind of work. When you operated in a space this restricted and this dangerous, the entire world had to narrow down to the instrument in your hand and the tissue in front of it and nothing else. Surgeons who let their minds wander in situations like this made mistakes. Jerry did not let his mind wander. There were 2 moments during the surgery where he stopped moving for nearly 30 seconds each time. Not because something had gone wrong, because he needed to look at exactly where he was before going further. In the first pause, he was studying a small vascular structure that was closer to his working path than the imaging had suggested. In the second, he was deciding between 2 possible approaches to the final step of the procedure, and he took the 30 seconds to be completely certain he was choosing the right one. Dr. Patel, watching through the glass, later said those pauses were the most stressful moments of his career. The scrub nurse said she had never seen a surgeon that still, that controlled. Jerry moved when he was certain. That was his rule. He had followed it for 15 years. It had never failed him. At the 6-hour and 50-minute mark, he closed, stepped back from the table, and told Patel to take primary monitoring responsibility. The bleed was stopped. The accumulated pressure had been relieved carefully and completely. Silas Thorne's brain was receiving blood the way it was designed to receive it. Whether there would be lasting neurological damage depended on the next 2 days. But the immediate crisis was resolved. The surgery had worked. Jerry pulled off his gloves, dropped them, and sat down on a low stool in the corner of the operating room. He was tired in a way that went all the way through him. He sat there for a few minutes and breathed slowly and let the rest of the world come back around him. That was when he started noticing things he had not had time to notice during the surgery. Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. Jerry was not a detective. He had never investigated anything more complicated than a disputed hospital supply order. But 15 years of trauma surgery had taught him one thing that no other specialty taught in quite the same way. Injuries tell stories. The body records what happened to it with a precision that human memories cannot match. If you know how to read what the body recorded, it will tell you exactly what occurred, in what order, and sometimes why. It was a skill, more than any other, that had made Jerry the kind of surgeon people called when no one else would try. As Jerry sat on that stool in the corner of the operating room, reviewing mentally what he had seen during the procedure, the story the injury was telling him did not match the story he had been told. He called Patel over and asked to see the imaging scans again on the room's wall display. Patel pulled them up without asking why. "Look at the margins of the bleed," Jerry said. "Not the size of it, not the location. Just the margins." Patel studied the images. "I see a hemorrhagic stroke. A significant bleeding event in the margins," Jerry said again more quietly. Patel looked more carefully. He was a good physician. When he looked carefully, he found things. He found it this time. The edges of the bleed zone were unusually defined. In a standard hemorrhagic stroke caused by a ruptured blood vessel, the bleeding spread outward in an irregular pattern, moving through brain tissue in whatever direction offered least resistance. It was an organic, uneven spread. But the bleed in Thorne's brain had edges that were too clean, a spread pattern that was too consistent, too symmetrical in a way that natural processes did not typically produce. "That is unusual," Patel said slowly. "I have seen bleeds with margins like this twice before in my career," Jerry said. "Both times, the cause was a synthetic vasodilator compound, a specific class of pharmacological agents designed to cause targeted disruption of small blood vessel integrity when introduced into the bloodstream in the right concentration. The compound is almost never detected in standard toxicology screenings because most laboratories do not have protocols for it. You have to specifically look for it. You have to know it exists to know to look." Patel turned from the screen and looked at Jerry directly. "You are saying this was not a naturally occurring stroke." "I am saying the imaging pattern is inconsistent with a naturally occurring hemorrhagic event of this type," Jerry said. He was being careful with his words because he was making a clinical observation, not an accusation, and he understood the difference. "I am saying that someone who knew what they were doing could have introduced a substance designed to cause exactly this pattern of bleeding. in exactly this location, in a way that would look indistinguishable from a natural stroke to anyone who was not specifically looking for the alternative. The operating room was quiet, except for the steady sound of the monitoring equipment tracking Thorne's vitals. "If that is true," Patel said, and then stopped. "If that is true," Jerry said, completing the thought, "then someone attempted to murder him in a way that was designed to be undetectable." Jerry spent the next 45 minutes going through everything Patel could give him access to regarding Thorne's recent medical history. He went through the blood work from a routine examination 6 days before the collapse. Thorne's cardiovascular profile had been good for a man of 67. His blood pressure was managed and stable on existing medication. His clotting factors were in normal range. There was nothing in that report that predicted or suggested a catastrophic brain bleed less than a week later. Then he found something in Patel's own notes from the morning of the collapse. In the first minutes after Thorne went down, Patel had recorded that Thorne had been complaining of an unusual headache since approximately 7 in the morning, roughly 90 minutes before the collapse occurred. Patel had noted it and attributed it to stress. Also in those notes was a brief observation that Patel had apparently not revisited: fine muscular tremors in Thorne's right hand, lasting approximately 20 minutes before the collapse. Patel had attributed those to anxiety as well. They were not anxiety. Fine muscular tremors occurring in a specific limb without an obvious neurological cause, preceding a major brain event and accompanied by a localized headache, were a textbook early response to certain pharmacological agents entering the nervous system before the primary effect of the agent manifested. The body was reacting to something it did not recognize. The tremors were the early warning that the compound was already in the bloodstream and working. Jerry told Patel what he believed the tremors indicated. Patel listened, went quiet, and then said he wished he had thought about that earlier. Jerry told him there was no reason he would have. The connection was not obvious unless you had seen it before, and very few physicians had. He called Adeline into the room. He had been waiting to talk to her about 2 things, and one of them was the injury. The other was something he had been turning over in his head since the helicopter ride. Something that had been developing slowly in the background of his thinking while his conscious attention was on the surgery. "Crestwood Medical Center," Jerry said when Adeline sat down. "Tell me about Silas Thorne's connection to Crestwood." Adeline went still. She did not move or change expression, but something shifted behind her eyes that told Jerry the question had hit a target he had aimed at without knowing it exactly. "Why do you ask?" she said. "Because you told me on the helicopter that you've been following my work for some time," Jerry said. The only reason a person at Thorne's level of resources follows an individual trauma surgeon at a mid-sized regional hospital is if they have a specific interest in that hospital. The only person with both the resources and the motivation to maintain that kind of surveillance of Crestwood Medical Center is someone with a financial stake in it. Adeline held his gaze for a moment. Then she sat down fully in the chair beside him. "Silas Thorne is a controlling silent shareholder of the Crestwood Health Group," she said. "He holds 63% of the parent company through a layered structure of holding entities. His name appears on none of the public filings. The arrangement has been in place for 11 years. Jerry let that settle. And the board decision to terminate my contract this morning required approval at the shareholder level for positions above a certain grade," Adeline said. His proxy signature was on the authorization. He did not know what he was approving. He had over 40 documents requiring proxy action in the past 2 weeks. His proxy handled them as a batch without individual review. Jerry looked at the operating room where Silas Thorne lay sedated and monitored. He had just performed 6 hours and 50 minutes of the most technically demanding surgery of his career to save the life of the man who had signed the document that ended his employment. He had saved the man who fired him. He had done it because a man was dying, and Jerry Johnson did not allow people to die if he could stop it. That was not a moral calculation he made in the moment. It was simply who he was at the deepest level. But knowing what he knew now gave the situation a particular quality that he could not quite name. "There's something important I need to tell you," Jerry said, "about the injury." He told her everything. He told her about the bleed margins, the vasodilator compound pattern, the tremors, the timeline, the blood work from the previous week. He told it all to her in plain, clear language without softening any of it. because Adeline was clearly a person who needed information delivered accurately and did not benefit from having it cushioned. When he finished, she sat in silence for almost a full minute. She was not panicking. She was processing. "You are telling me that the attempt on his life was designed to look like natural causes," she said. "I am telling you that if my read of the injury pattern is correct, yes," Jerry said. "I am telling you to have his blood from this morning analyzed by a laboratory that knows the specific compound class I am describing. I am telling you to treat the circumstances of his collapse as a potential crime scene. And I am telling you that whoever did this currently believes they succeeded." Adeline picked up her phone. She made a call that lasted 70 seconds, gave 3 specific instructions in a calm, precise voice, and ended the call. Then she looked at Jerry. "Please stay," she said. "I know we have not handled any part of this the way we should have. I know you have every reason to want to go home. But please stay until he wakes up. He will want to speak to you himself." Jerry thought about the cardboard box on the side of Route 9. He thought about Maya. He thought about the mortgage and the school fees and all the practical, real-world problems that were still waiting for him at home. Then he thought about what Adeline had just told him about the silent shareholder structure, and what it meant that someone had tried to kill Silas Thorne in a way that only would have been discovered by a surgeon who had seen the specific injury pattern twice before. "I will stay," he said. Silas Thorne woke up 31 hours after the surgery. It was not dramatic or sudden. People did not wake up quickly from deep anesthesia, combined with serious brain trauma, regardless of what film suggested. They came back in stages, over hours, as the layers of sedation lifted one at a time, and the brain slowly reasserted its normal functioning. First there was movement, then response to light, then the ability to track sound, then, eventually, words. Thorne's words, when they came, were slow and hoarse and chosen deliberately. That was actually a good sign. Deliberate word choice after this kind of event suggested that the frontal lobe functions Jerry had been most concerned about had survived intact. The first thing Thorne said clearly enough to be understood was Adeline's name. She was at his side within seconds. "I am here," she said. "Did it work?" Thorne said. It was a strained first question, Jerry thought. Not where am I, or what happened, or how long. Did it work? The question of a man whose mind immediately went to outcomes. "You are alive," Adeline said. "Dr. Johnson performed the surgery. 6 hours and 50 minutes. You are stable." Thorne turned his head toward Jerry slowly. Even coming out of what he'd been through, his pale blue eyes were sharp. He looked at Jerry with the focused attention of a man who spent his life making assessments of people quickly and had learned to trust those assessments. "Dr. Johnson," Thorne said, "from Crestwood." "Until yesterday morning," Jerry said. Something moved across Thorne's face. "I was briefed on that. During one of the early hours, Adeline told me." He paused to breathe carefully. "Speaking was still costing immeasurable effort. I want you to know that I did not know about your termination when the proxy approval was processed. I did not review that document individually." Adeline explained how the proxy system works. Jerry said, "I understand." "I reviewed your record," Thorne said. "While I was coming around last night, someone read your file to me. The Patterson case, the Osei case, the Reyes procedure, your complaint filings about the transfer protocol over the past 2 years." He breathed again. Vane made a serious error in judgment. Multiple serious errors. It will be corrected. That is not the most important conversation we need to have right now. Jerry said, "Adeline, did the laboratory results come back?" Adeline had been expecting this question. "An hour ago," she said. She looked at Thorne. "The compound Jerry described was present in your blood sample from yesterday morning. The lab confirmed it. It is a synthetic vasodilator agent. It is not naturally occurring, and it does not appear in standard toxicology." Thorne did not react with shock. He did not ask them to repeat it. He looked at the ceiling for a moment and then looked back at them and said, "Tell me the rest." "Someone put it in your system," Jerry said. "Through your morning medication, we believe, based on what Marcus's team found in the state pharmacy. Someone with access to your household pharmacy substituted the compound in the past 3 to 4 days. The tremors you experienced in the morning before you collapsed were the early neurological response to it. Thorne was quiet for a moment. 3 months ago, he said, speaking slowly and clearly despite the effort it took, I began receiving intelligence suggesting a coordinated effort to compromise my controlling interests in several of my healthcare holdings. I had been running an internal investigation. Quietly, I had not yet identified the primary architect. Your healthcare holdings, Jerry said, including Crestwood and 7 other hospital groups across 4 states, Thorne said. If I were incapacitated or dead, my controlling interests would transfer under the terms of my estate plan to a board of trustees with authority to restructure or liquidate holdings during a transitional period. Those trustees would have had authority to do things I would never have authorized, to sell to buyers I would never have approved, to restructure in ways that would have been enormously profitable for certain parties and enormously damaging to the communities those hospitals served. Director Vane, Jerry said, tell me what you know about him. Thorne said. Jerry told him. He told him about the 2 years of cost-cutting protocols, the transfer policy that sent uninsured patients to facilities that could not adequately care for them, the reduction in nursing staff, the supply contract changes, the way Vane had systematically dismantled the parts of Crestwood that served people who could not pay. He told him about the performance bonus Vane had received at the end of his first year. He told him that the kind of person who ran a hospital purely as a financial instrument was exactly the kind of person who would benefit most from having a silent majority shareholder out of the picture. Thorne listened to all of it without interruption. When Jerry finished, he said, Adeline, get Marcus. Marcus arrived in 17 minutes. He was a compact, quiet man in his 50s who had the manner of someone who had spent years in situations where speaking too much was a liability. He sat beside Thorne's bed with a small leather notebook and listened as the 3 of them went through everything together, from Jerry's first observations about the injury pattern to the laboratory confirmation to what Thorne knew about the investigation he had been running. What Marcus then assembled over the next hour, drawing on the work his team had already been doing since Adeline's call the previous night, was a coherent picture of what had happened and who was behind it. Harold Vane had been recruited 20 months earlier by a consortium of 3 private equity firms. These firms had been attempting to acquire the Crestwood Health Group and 6 related hospital networks for years and had been refused at every approach. Thorne had no interest in selling. He had built the holdings with a specific vision for how community health care should be run, and he did not want to hand them to financial operators whose interest was in extracting value rather than delivering care. The consortium had eventually concluded that the most efficient path forward was not to buy the network. It was to remove Thorne from the equation. Vane had been an easy recruitment. He was deeply in personal debt from 2 failed business ventures before he entered hospital administration. He had the ambition of someone who had always believed he deserved more than he had, and he had the flexibility of conscience that came from believing the world owed him something. The consortium had offered him a senior executive position in the restructured network in exchange for cooperation. His cooperation had included providing detailed information about Thorne's personal routines, his staffing patterns, his private medical history access illegally through his position as director of a Thorne-owned facility, and the identities of the household employees who had been most recently hired and were therefore most susceptible to outside recruitment. 2 household staff members had been identified through financial record analysis. Both had received significant deposits from shell accounts in the 6 weeks before the collapse. Both had since disappeared. Marcus's team was working with federal contacts on locating them. The pharmacist who had access to Thorne's estate medication supply had also left the country 4 days before the collapse, which in hindsight explained itself clearly enough. Is there sufficient evidence to move on Vane specifically? Thorne asked Marcus. We have his communications with consortium representatives going back 14 months. Marcus said. We have financial records showing 4 payments to him totaling just under $900,000 routed through holding companies registered in 2 jurisdictions. We have records of his unauthorized access to your personal medical file through the Crestwood system. And we have the lab results from this morning's blood analysis, confirming the compound. With Dr. Johnson's clinical testimony about the injury pattern, yes, there is more than sufficient evidence. Federal authorities, Thorne said, already contacted. Marcus said, They are ready to move when you give the word. Give it, Thorne said. Marcus stood, closed his notebook, and left the room. He moved quietly. But Jerry had the clear sense that significant things were already happening in other places as a direct result of that brief conversation. The machinery of consequence was in motion for Harold Vane, and it was moving faster than Vane would realize. Thorne rested for a few minutes after Marcus left. Jerry checked his vitals, made a small adjustment to one of his 4 lines, and was beginning to consider whether to recommend Thorne sleep more when Thorne spoke again. Why did you do it? Thorne said. The surgery? Jerry said. You knew by the time you scrubbed and that I was connected to the hospital that fired you, Thorne said. Adeline told me she had explained the holding structure before the procedure began. You knew that my signature, however indirectly, was on your termination papers. You could have declined. You could have said your ethical obligations did not extend to saving the man who had just taken your livelihood. Jerry thought about the honest answer. He did not look for a noble-sounding one. He looked for the true one. I did not decline, he said, because declining is not something I know how to do when a person is dying in front of me and I can stop it. It has nothing to do with who you are or what connection you have to my situation. You were dying and I could help. So I helped. That is how it has always worked for me. Thorne looked at him with those sharp eyes for a long moment. Adeline also told me that you could have finished the surgery and said nothing about what you observed in the injury pattern. Your obligation ended when you closed the incision. Raising the alarm about a potential murder attempt put you in the middle of a very complicated and potentially dangerous situation that had nothing to do with your surgical work. I noticed evidence that suggested someone's life was still in danger, Jerry said. I said something. That is also not something I know how to not do. Thorne was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was still slow, but had gained something. Intention. I want to offer you something, Thorne said. Not as payment. I am not suggesting you save my life for reward. I want to offer you something because what happened in the past 36 hours has clarified something for me that I have been aware of intellectually but had not been fully confronting practically. I have spent 30 years building a healthcare network, and I have allowed the financial management of that network to drift significantly away from the purpose I built it for. I have been focused on the wrong things. Vane is an extreme example of what happens when that drift goes unchecked, but he is not the only example. He told Jerry what he was thinking. It took 15 minutes to lay out fully, with questions from Jerry and answers from Thorne, and by the end of it, Jerry understood the proposal completely. Thorne wanted to take 5 of the underperforming hospitals in his network, specifically the ones serving predominantly uninsured and low-income populations that had been the most affected by the cost-cutting culture that had spread through his holdings in the past several years, and restructure them as a semi-independent medical collective. The collective would be governed by a foundation he would fully endow with capital sufficient to operate without needing to prioritize revenue over care. The board of the foundation would consist entirely of practicing physicians and patient advocates. No financial consultants, no corporate operators, no proxy shareholders signing documents in batches without reading them. The collective's medical director would have full authority over clinical standards, staffing decisions, and budget allocation within the foundation's parameters. Thorne wanted Jerry to be the medical director. You would have complete clinical authority, Thorne said. You would answer to the medical board, not to a corporate structure. You would never have a director Vane above you again, because the foundation's governing documents would make it structurally impossible for that kind of appointment to occur. Why me? Jerry said, you have the resources to recruit anyone in medicine. Because in the past 31 hours, I have watched what you do when you believe no one of consequence is watching, Thorne said. You performed that surgery with the same standard you would have applied if the patient had been anyone. You told me uncomfortable and dangerous truths when saying nothing would have been easier and safer for you. You are sitting in this room talking to me right now when you have every right to go home and let whatever happens next happen without you. He paused. Those are not surgical skills. Those are the qualities of someone who should be making decisions about how medicine is practiced, and they are genuinely rare. Jerry thought about it carefully. He thought about Maya and what a stable, well-funded position would mean for their life. He thought about Robert Patterson walking out of Crestwood with tears in his eyes, and what it would mean to build a system where that outcome was a standard rather than the exception that got a doctor fired. He thought about 15 years of fighting a losing battle against people like Vane, the exhaustion of it, the way it ground him down slowly while he kept pretending it had not. He thought about what it would mean to stop fighting that battle, and instead build something that did not require fighting. One condition, Jerry said. Name it. Hiring decisions are made on clinical skill and professional ethics, not connections, not who recommend them, not who they know. If the best qualified person for a position is someone no one in your network has ever heard of, that person gets the position. Agreed, Thorne said, without hesitation or qualification. Then yes, Jerry said, I will do it. Harold Vane was arrested 11 days later. Federal agents came to Crestwood Medical Center on a Thursday morning and walked to the main entrance with a particular unhurried confidence of people who knew exactly where they were going and had all the paperwork they needed. They went up to the administrative floor and arrested Vane at his own desk. His assistant was present. 2 department heads who had stopped by for a routine morning check-in were present. Everyone in that room saw it happen. The charges included conspiracy to commit murder, corporate espionage, illegal access to protected medical records, wire fraud, and a set of financial crimes that the federal investigators had identified once they began examining the money trail that Marcus's team had initially uncovered. Each charge carried its own weight, and together they added up to consequences that Vane would spend the rest of his working life managing. The story reached every major national news outlet within 4 hours. The angle was consistent across all of them. The surgeon fired in the morning, called back by helicopter the same afternoon, who had saved the billionaire who unknowingly fired him, discovered a murder plot during the surgery, and helped bring down a corrupt hospital director in the process. It was a kind of story that wrote itself, and the press wrote it enthusiastically. Jerry did not speak to any reporters. He had nothing to say to them that seemed worth the time. He was busy with other things. The foundation was formally established 6 weeks after Thorne was discharged from the state medical facility and declared fully recovered by a panel of 3 independent neurologists who Thorne had insisted on consulting before he accepted any such declaration from his own staff. The 5 hospitals designated for the new structure were announced the following week. Jerry spent the weeks between those announcements interviewing candidates and reviewing clinical records and building the framework for how the collective would actually function on a daily basis. He hired Dr. Keisha Amos, an emergency physician he had worked alongside briefly 7 years earlier and had never forgotten, as the first member of his senior clinical team. He had always thought that if he ever ran anything, Amos would be one of the first people he called. She accepted the position in the same phone call in which he offered it. He called Maya the evening the foundation offices opened for first time. He told her that things were going to be genuinely okay now, not just okay in the way you told a child things were okay when you were not sure yourself. She asked if he was still a doctor. He told her he was more of a doctor now than he had ever been before. She said that sounded a bit strange, but that she was glad and asked if they could get pizza. He said yes. They got pizza, and he let her pick the toppings, and he did not check his phone once during dinner. He thought sometimes, the months that followed, about the cardboard box he had left on the side of Route 9. He had never gone back for it. He assumed it had blown into the field or been collected by someone passing by, or had simply sat there until the weather did what weather does to cardboard boxes left outside. He did not need anything in it anymore. He had a new office with large windows that faced the park and a new photograph of Maya on the desk that was not old or water-warped. It was taken at the beach again. Same beach as the old one. She was laughing again. Same light in her hair. Director Harold Vane, in his initial statement to federal investigators, said that he had made decisions he now regretted and that he had been put in an impossible situation by people with more power than he had. His lawyer advised him to stop making statements shortly after that. His trial was scheduled for the following spring. The private equity consortium that had recruited him was the subject of a separate federal investigation that industry observers predicted would take years to fully resolve. Silas Thorne recovered completely. His neurological function returned to baseline within 8 weeks, which Jerry had told him was possible but not certain, and which Thorne had apparently decided to treat as a target rather than a hope. Thorne gave one interview about the experience to a publication he chose himself, and said in it that the main thing he had taken from the episode was a clearer understanding of which parts of what he'd built actually mattered and which parts he had been confusing for the parts that mattered. He also said that he had a much stricter personal policy now about reviewing documents before his proxy signed them. The interviewer took this as a joke. Thorne did not correct her, and Jerry Johnson, who had walked out of Crestwood Medical Center on a Tuesday morning with a cardboard box and 15 years in it, had stopped walking, put the box down, and stepped towards something that turned out to be his actual life, not the version he had been working toward inside the hospital that didn't want him. The real one, built on the things he had always believed and had never quite had a room to practice fully. That was the kind of man he had always been. It had just taken the right moment and 2 black helicopters and a dying billionaire on Route 9 to show the rest of the world what Jerry Johnson already knew about himself. The story of Jerry Johnson teaches one powerful lesson. Integrity is not something you turn on when it is convenient. It is something you carry even when it costs you everything. Jerry lost his job because he refused to let a poor man die to protect a budget, and he saved the life of the man who fired him not because he expected a reward, but because walking away from someone dying was simply not something he knew how to do. That one quality, the refusal to compromise who he was regardless of the circumstances, was the exact same quality that uncovered a murder plot, brought down a corrupt director, and eventually built him something far greater than the job he lost. The world will often reward the people who cut corners and punish the people who do not, and it will look, for a long time, like the wrong people are winning. But character has a way of becoming visible at the exact moment it matters most, and when it does, it tends to change everything. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My friend said, I wouldn't even reach 10,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show him that these tales matter. Please subscribe to this channel, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. And here's what I need to know. Do you want part 2?